Open this meeting, special meeting of the FORA Youth Authority Board for Monday, November 2nd at 12 noon. Thank you. Is it noon? Someone just told me it's 11:58. 11:59. Let's wait 60 seconds. Yes. I will try this again. If you please take your seats, we'll open this special meeting of FORA Youth Authority Board of Directors for Monday, November 2nd at 12 o'clock. Appreciate it if you please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the Republic. Thank you. Could we please have a roll call?
Let's do this again, please, just for the purposes of keeping the record. City of Carmel by the Sea, Mayor Pro Tem Beach. City of Delray Oaks, Mayor Evelyn. Okay. City of Marina, Mayor Pro Tem O'Connell.
Here.
Council Member Morton. City of Monterey, Vice Mayor Hoffa. Monterey County Supervisor Potter. Supervisor Phillips. Supervisor Parker. City of Pacific Grove, Council Member Lucius. Okay, thank you. City of Salinas, Mayor Gunter. City of San City, Mayor Pendergrass. City of Seaside, Mayor Rubio.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Oglesby. Ex officios, 20th Congressional District Congressman FAR, Rochelle Dornat. 17th State Senate District, Senator Nicole Charles. 29th State Assembly District, Assembly Member Stone, Erica Parker. University of California, Santa Cruz, Donna Blitzer. Graham Bikes, yes, I was going to get to you. Thank you. California State University, Dr. Eduardo Ochoa. He said he wasn't coming. Andre Lewis. Nope. Monterey Peninsula College, Vicky Nakamura. Monterey Peninsula Unified School District, PK Diffenbaugh. Monterey Salinas Transit, Hunter Harbath. Or Mike Gallant. Lisa, yes, thank you. Transportation Agency of Monterey County, Debbie Hale. Todd Mack or Hank Myers. U.S. Army Colonel Fellinger or Hugh Harden. Fort Bragg Office, Bill Collins or Lance Shurtleff. Marina Coast Water District Director Lay or Director Gustafson. Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you very much. There are no announcements. I've been informed there are no announcements, so we'll go to public comment. Individuals wishing to address the board jurisdiction matters not on the agenda, you have up to 3 minutes. The microphone is over in the right-hand corner. Is there any member of the public who desires to make public comment on any matters not on the agenda? Seeing none, we'll close public comments and we'll go to number 6, business items. A is the water augmentation program planning, three-party planning resolution. This is a second vote. Michael, do we need any kind of a brief presentation?
Yes, Chair, very, very briefly, the board members did get a note from council or CalAm with respect to this issue, and I did have a conversation with him on Friday. I believe there's a representative from CalAm to speak to that matter today, and this is simply the second vote at the next meeting from the item that was voted on at the October meeting.
Thank you. Is there any Go ahead. Let me first open it first to any comments from, any questions from any members of the board? Yes, Board Member Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At the last meeting, it was suggested by one of the board members, and I think staff said that it would be possible to prepare something that spells out more clearly what the money was going to be spent on. And so I'm curious, I don't see anything along those lines to help us, because I think there were concerns that money might be spent on something that might conflict with the CalAm project, or to put in writing what was said verbally about the priorities of conservation and so on.
Who would like to address that question? Michael?
I believe that there was, I'm just double checking with Jonathan Garcia, was that the language related to this specific item? I thought that was directly related to the resolution of the dispute.
Through the chair, I don't think we had a discussion of the dispute itself because it was removed from the agenda and moved into closed session. So the only thing we would have been discussing is this item. And I think it's important that we, before we authorize money, we actually know what it's for and that we have the protections that might need in writing.
John?
So my understanding is that this is just allowing budgetary authorization before it proceed with this planning process. We'll come back with an agreement with answers to questions raised at the previous meeting. That's the intention.
Ask follow-up
Thank you,
question?
Jonathan. Councilwoman Morton?
Yes, so if in fact we do not know what the scope of the work is, how do we know that it's $157,000?
The staff looked at the line item for planning. The $470,000 was included in the budget, and staff had recommended that each of the three parties provide equal amounts toward that planning. So Monterey Marine and Coast Water District, Monterey Regional Water Pollution Control Agency, and FORA each would put equal amounts into the three-party planning. And staff has indicated before that our priorities in terms of this three-party planning would be conservation as our primary goal, because it's the most effective. And I want to make sure that that's on the record, Supervisor, again, that our primary purpose is to look at conservation. The second, the Pure Water Project, can address our questions about reclaim, which is the second priority, which clearly would be less expensive than a third alternative, which we have not taken off the table, but would come much later. That would be determined if we have a need after these first two for DSAP. And so the priority for this planning was to look at the alternatives that the FORA board directed, that all of the above, but with a priority on conservation and reclamation as the two primary sources.
Follow-up question. The $470,000 in the budget from CWD, when it was proposed to us for approval, it was a number that was identified as a 10% design of a desal plant. And the character of what that 470 got changed. But there was no documentation that even supported that it required 470,000, 580,000, or whatever number. The question that still comes up repetitively for me in making prudent decisions about the expenditure of money is, how do we know the 470, what relevance that has, what is it going to produce for us to contribute 157,000 of our funds towards something that's as yet undefined?
Well, again, the reason why the board voted on this last time was that we thought of three parties agreeing to share that cost and bring an agreement back to the board that would define that scope, would provide the board with the information it needs to make the decision.
So we are anticipating an agreement coming back at time for the board consideration.
That's what Jonathan indicated, and that's our intent.
I have a quick comment.
Yes.
I think it might.
I'm sorry, excuse me, is the comment or question?
Question, Alex.
Thank you.
Is it not true that item 2 under discussion of what we would be adopting makes it clear in 2 ways that we're going to commit up to 1/3 or 1/7 and an amount not to exceed 470. It seems to me that open the possibility that that budget number goes down, and that we just make sure we carry forward that is an exact number and applying to this point. Yeah, that our future documents reflect that. I think that might, because otherwise it is just a stab in the dark.
The item that was voted on by the board does not have that limitation, but the agreement we would bring back, we could make sure that that was there.
Good formation. Thank you. Any other board members? Seeing now, go out to the public. Does any member of the public having any questions or comments relating to this item? If so, you have to go to the right-hand side of the mouthpiece. Thank you. You are not required to identify yourself, but feel free to do so.
Good afternoon, members of the board. My name is Catherine Stedman. I'm with California American Water, and I wanted to call your attention to the letter sent to you last week from our attorney, Tony Lombardo, and the key points in it pertaining to the item before you. It is our position that the $157,000, which is also the subject of your closed session discussion on November 13th, if it is invested toward the water augmentation supply projects, it should be limited to conservation and water reclamation as the priority projects, and that none of the funds should be spent toward purposes outside of these priorities. FORA should assert its ability to approve expenditures of the funds to ensure that they are being used appropriately. With these safeguards in place, we support staff's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in the public? Let's get public comment closed.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Jan Schreiner, speaking as a resident of Marina. I'm wondering if that letter from Caroline was received prior to the preparation of the packet, because I did not see that in the packet. And in reference to questions by Councilman Morton, I don't see any staff from Marina Coast Water District, and I wondered if those questions were, oh, thank you, Pete. If those questions had been raised prior to the meeting, or if Councilmember Morton had taken the time to read the agenda packets of January 2015 of the Marina Coast Water District, where it was linked to. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Take a shot, but I don't know the exact timing, but the board packets, I believe, went out earlier than we received the letter from Mr. Lombardo. That was one of the questions. It didn't arrive till like late Friday, and I think all the board members got it at the same time, which was after the actual announcement and board agenda went out.
Thank you very much. Anyone else in the public? Seeing now, close public comments, bring it back to the board for motion and follow-up comments. Motion been made several times by the person sitting to my left, Mayor Rubio. Is there a second? Board Member Prendergast silently says second. Any comments? You can.
I just want to
Let me take it. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The question that comes up in my mind as I read the resolution before us, in section J, where it lists all approaches in my reading as equal possibilities, what procedural constraints create the sense of priorities that's been described verbally but doesn't show up in the document?
You said with procedural requirements?
Well, there was an
item,
implication
right.
that
I would suggest that item J5 specifically says all agreements on funding, budgeting, CEQA processing, and other deal points will returned to the three boards for specific approvals. And from a process standpoint, I think that's a fairly solid control.
What does processing mean in that context?
I was referring back to your question
I
about what process.
I made it. So how does that work?
So the agreement with respect to moving ahead will come back to this board for approval.
So none of this money gets spent until we see the plan of how it's going to get spent.
I believe that some of the money will be spent. Steve, would you like to respond?
It's kind of a horse and cart and horse situation. I mean, we're looking for budget authority, to be sure. So this allows us to spend up to, as was pointed out, $157,000, but with certain limitations in terms of the priorities. So we have not heard anything submitted by the outside counsel or by the board itself that is inconsistent with how we intend to go forward, which is to do a three-party planning process. And you can't really do the process without a budget, so it would be kind of a cart and horse type thing if we couldn't spend any money before we come back with the results of the planning process. It doesn't make sense in that respect. So what we've done is we've heard what is being said. It's very clear that this board does not want us to concentrate on the desal portion, does not want us to go into the prior mode of the 10% desal planning process, which is actually an MCWD line item. They've agreed to back off of that as well. So this would be about a partnership to move forward with the recycled water aspect of the project. So that's very clearly understood by staff.
Thank you, Steve.
I will then, we have a motion and a second on the table, I believe.
Yes.
I'll move to amend that in J1, word desal. I also have questions about other water sources.
Substitute motion to, on J, to delete the word desal. Is that correct? Correct. Is there a second to that?
Second that.
Second, Board Member Gunter. So we have a substitute and we have a motion. When the time comes, we'll vote on the substitute motion. Is there anyone who has a comment on the board related to either one of the motions?
Through the chair. I really have a problem with that, that amendment, because we're limiting our ability to study all the options here at the formal corridor. I understand the motivation for CalAm. CalAm's problem with us having that as part of the portfolio. But if we're going to engage in a study that's going to answer all the questions for the former corridor, there has to be that consideration. That's not to say to focus on that, but it can't be left out as a possible tool in the toolbox for the former corridor. Recognizing that there's a so-called regional solution that takes care of the peninsula only, there has to be the ability for this board to make decisions on how we augment our water capability here on the former corridor. If we go through conservation and we go through recycled water options as described in the Pure Monterey project as a recycled water product, and they don't meet the need, then we still have to have the ability to look at other options, and that may be a small desal plant. I know that Marina has a small plant that they could reconfigure. So there's a lot of things that need to be studied, and I don't think that we need to throw that out, throwing the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. I think it limits us as a board, and really does hamper our fiduciary responsibility in terms of finding what's the most effective way to find water. So for that reason, I will be voting no on the amendment.
And just a reminder to the board that an amendment would do away with it's no longer a second vote, it's a brand new vote.
It's so much fun being Chair.
Chair, if I may, you're doing a great job. Steve.
I
You're a
serve,
great target. We appreciate you.
just
being
because
here,
it's not 2 o'clock yet, I know. Go ahead, please, sir.
I appreciate the motion and I understand why. And there seems to be a matter of trust. I appreciate the fact that I'm just hoping FORA is not going to spend $157,000 to do some more lawsuits that Marina Coast Water District has a very grand history of suing, and they continue to sue. The people that are paying for this lawsuit aren't represented in this room. I don't see any of the ratepayers sitting here going, we're happy to pay 7, 9, 15% in the years to come so that these lawsuits can continue without coming up with solutions. So that does concern me that we're going to give them money from FORA, money from the other 2 organizations to move this project forward. So I am concerned. We have to consider that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from board members? Now, okay, Board Member Parker?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I just want to say I appreciate what Mr. Camp is trying to do, but to me, the concern is before we vote on allocating money, we need to have it clearly in writing what we're spending it on. And so even with that amendment, this is the cart and the horse are in the wrong places as well.
Thank you. Okay, my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, please, Authority Council, is that we will vote on the substitute motion. If it passes, but it's not unanimous, we would have to bring it back for a second vote. And if it does pass, we would not vote on the other motion.
If it doesn't pass.
If it does pass, but not by unanimous, but it does pass, then we would not vote on the other motion.
That's right.
Okay. So let's have a roll call, please, on the substitute motion, which is basically the same as the first motion, except with deleting the word decel.
Mayor Pro Tem Beach? Chair O'Connell?
No.
Mayor Eaton? Vice Mayor Hoffa? Mayor Gunter? Councilmember Lucius? Councilmember? Councilmember Morgan? No. Mayor Pro Tem Oglesby? Dear Supervisor Parker? Pendergrass? Supervisor Phillips? Supervisor Potter? Mayor Rubio? Five.
So it failed.
Yes.
So we'll now, maybe someone sneak in real quick. So we'll now have a vote on the motion, which is the second vote from the previous meeting. Again, a roll call, please. If it comes up 5-5, I don't know what we'll do.
Mayor Pro Tem Beach? Mayor O'Connell?
Yes.
Mayor Gunter? Mayor Kemp?
No.
Councilmember Morgan? Supervisor Parker? Mayor Pendergrass? Supervisor Phillips? Supervisor Potter? Mayor Rubio?
Yeah.
6-4.
That passed. Thank you very much. We will now move on to item 6B, the workshop, Regional Urban Design Guidelines. If you have not been next door this morning, please take the time to go over there. I think it's from 4 o'clock to 6 this evening. Yes. Okay. Or anytime. Who is going to go forward with this workshop? Jonathan? Or
Well, Chair O'Connell, this will be a team approach on the workshop, and we'll have our consultants are here, and Josh Metz is here. Members of the Regional Urban Design Guidelines Task Force are here, and will certainly want to contribute, especially Mayor Pro Tem Beach from the City of Carmel. Over the course of the last 18 months, this board has undertaken the Regional Urban Design Guidelines that were described in the 1997 Base Reuse Plan. An effort to put these Regional Urban Design Guidelines together started many, many moons ago with the Highway 1 design guidelines and with individual projects that took pieces of the regional urban design guidelines and brought them forward. However, in the reassessment process in 2012, it was concluded that these regional urban design guidelines, as a broad, base-wide effort, needed to be undertaken. Josh will give you a bit of the history on how we got to where we are today, and Jason King from Dover Cole and Associates will talk about the major components of the regional urban design guidelines.
Thank you. And this is just an information item for the board members and the public. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, board members and members of the public. Indeed, this has been an 18-month process for this particular segment, but it has been well. It was originally prescribed in the Reeves Plan in '97, and then I think a particular noteworthy action was taken in May of 1999 when the FORA board chose to proceed without a regional redevelopment agency. That would have been a area where the guidelines would have been developed. PowerPoint thing, so I'll pause here for a moment. Yeah, okay. So I'm using this as our timeline that we often use to help people understand these big projects that we've undertaken. But I'm talking about May 1999 vote where the board chose to pursue a policy of jurisdictional redevelopment, oriented rather than FORA taking that on as a singular action. It wasn't until 2005 that the board approved a document which is known as the Highway 1 Design Corridor Guidelines. That was one of a set of 5 areas that were described in the Reeves Plan as needing guidelines developed. And then during the reassessment project in 2012, the remaining completion of the full suite of regional urban design guidelines was identified as a yet-to-be-completed action, set of actions. And we began this project in 2014, where the board approved a work plan, including funding of the completion of these guidelines. So we went through a lengthy development of an RFP with a task force that was impaneled by the board, most of the lead agency representatives from each of the jurisdictions. And we did a national competitive search for a multidisciplinary design team. Resulted in a unanimous selection of the Dover Cole and Partners team. They came here in the beginning of the fall of last year, and we did a series of site visits where we met with each of the jurisdiction representatives, extensive meetings with the public and our development community, and learned about their concerns. We came back in February of this year. We did a 10-day design charrette where we repeated a number of those meetings in more depth and invited the public to engage in hands-on planning exercises. And then since then, we have taken that material developed during that process and the extensive amount of local planning and regional plan, general plan guidance that exists, and work to integrate that into a concise set of policy documents that would address the requirements of the Reeves Plan and help us provide the confidence that would enable development to happen more quickly and achieve the build out of the Reeves Plan and provide the community and agency representatives and elected representatives something to reference in great detail when they're talking about what the future might look like. Just a note, these are some of the dates that the task force met. We have 14 meetings up there. We've also taken a significant amount of public comments throughout the process. We had urban design guideline items on the board, agenda 6 times, had the open public task force meetings 14 of those meetings where we've also taken public input. We've received written comments from our jurisdictions. There's a lot of words here, but this is intended to show where we have received written comments, for example, from the city of Seaside, stating it's unclear how the guidelines would be implemented and utilized to evaluate future project plans to determine consistency. This has been a regular message that we've received, not only from the city of Seaside, but from many concerned stakeholders. In this case, we responded with written clarification. We actually enhanced the language in the draft document to specifically address that question. So this is intended to show kind of the depth that we have gone to seek and receive and respond to each of our constituents' input. Other ones that we have here are the reuse plan identifies design guidelines to be developed for areas of regional importance. It defines these areas as Highway 1 Scenic Corridor, 12th Street, main gate areas, major through roadways such as Reservation and Blanco, General Jim Moore, Broadway, General Jim Moore, Eucalyptus, and Surplus 2 do not fit within the PRP description. Areas should be removed as centers and gateways. This was a response to an early draft. We came back with clarifying language that really references sentences within the reuse plan. We get into very detailed pieces and parts of the sentences. We say major through roadways, the actual language reads major through roadways such as Reservation Road and Blanco Road, as well as other areas to be determined. Staff reading on that is language such as indicates list is not comprehensive here. It was intended to be a starting point. It was actually up to the board to decide on what areas would be included. General Jim Moore is a major through roadway. It's a really increasingly important roadway. And so you can see here that the response was intended to just clarify the staff direction and provide that as far in advance as possible. Have everybody understand where. Here's some comments from the county talking about our treatment of public space definition there, and where we clarified the language in the current document. There's a second comment here about an early draft guideline that was described as front faces front. The current document that guideline has evolved. But again, they were making a case for kind of specific, site-specific constraints and how that would be treated. So this page is also, again, illustrating our response level to these comments. We put this up here just to show that the FORA Act provides FORA the power to make consistency determinations in the local plan, consequence of Reed's plan, and that the zoning authority can deal with the local jurisdictions. This policy is not intended to override local authority. The Reed's plan provided 6 design principles that all inform the character of the built environment that was envisioned. So we drew on all of those in developing this set of policies. Design principle number 6 is quite specific. It says adopt regional design guidelines. So there's one sentence in the second paragraph, page 61, which you all heard me mention before, but this is sort of our main area where we can use this sentence along with this graphic to its left encompass the bulk of what we are to undertake in this project. So we also then had Authority Council review of the legal standing for regional urban design guidelines back in April, and so that is just provided here for reference. Specifically, that are required as distinct implementation action, that the guidelines are to address issues of visual quality and character, and they will establish standards for future consistency determinations. Not override prior or current consistency determinations based on land use designations or local zoning. So today's meeting is really intended to present the draft after all of this work with our task force and the public. It's an opportunity for questions from the board and for you to provide direct feedback to us, staff, and our consultant team before we make final preparations to bring back an actionable policy document for your consideration. Just before I hand it over to Jason, we have 4 chapters set out in the current draft. Introduction and policy application chapter. There's a chapter that focuses on what we call the base reuse plan focus areas, and then the guidelines themselves and subsequent definitions page. We've already heard comments from our earlier open house from some of our agency colleagues that during the definitions page, it's robust and clear as possible. Quite finally, we have made some number of significant advances from the earliest drafts in this process. Beginning with number 1 here, we developed a fair amount of content during the design charrette that included direct feedback from our member, the community who showed up and participated in our preference surveys and all of that. So a lot of really valuable content and language and graphics, but we decided to break that content out from what we were calling our policy language. So what we have in front of us is really oriented towards as narrow as possible language that would be relevant to your policy. We have worked to clarify how these guidelines will apply to the range of project status that we have on the Form corridor, those projects that where legislative land use decisions have already been before you, have already been approved, specific plans, zoning codes, and general plans, and for those projects that will be coming before you. We've strengthened the narrative directly with BRP policy and language, and we have continued to try to draw in the national best practices in urban planning and market-driven preferences out there on the landscape for people who will be potentially customers of our products that we develop here. And finally, we have responded robustly to jurisdiction agency. So with that introduction, I'll pass it over to Jason King from Coca-Cola Partners, who will lead you through a bit of a refresher on some of our key points, and then we will open it up for questions, comments, and discussion.
Thank you, Judge, very much. Jason?
So one aspect of the design guidelines that we haven't talked about yet is how the specific metrics were decided upon. So Josh talked about the public process that created the big ideas, how this is a refinement of the base reuse plan. But there are some very specific things. For instance, these design guidelines say only use dead ends and cul-de-sacs. We absolutely have to try to avoid those. These guidelines say wherever possible, if you're building something, network of streets, extend them to connect to other networks. Those are 2 very specific things the guidelines say, in addition to things like if you're creating different blocks, the sizes should be small and walkable. Where does that kind of thing come from? Well, to be honest, it came from a very close study of great neighborhoods like those in Seaside, where you have the interconnected network of streets, the small block sizes that connect. That's a guideline that is very present here and came from your area. Or if it says something about building orientation, formerly was called front space fronts because it was talking about how buildings should face each other, like people in a conversation. And it was talking about how buildings should be close to the street. Buildings should be oriented
in such a way as to create interesting spaces between them. That kind of concept came from a study of some other great places, like Pacific Grove, or in Carmel, or in Monterey, where I dare you to find a place where you do not have, that you like. Go to find any spot that you like in this whole peninsula. Look around and try to examine what it is that you like. I bet no case will you find that it isn't the case that all the buildings all face you. You're always faced, you're always fronted by buildings. On your public spaces, there are faces looking towards you. And so that's a guideline that came from study. There is all variety of public spaces described in the design guidelines, from the large parks to the smaller greens, and plazas, and squares. We don't have to dwell on these very much, but these are, what we're doing is we're looking at the specific kind of open space types that you have in this area, and we're trying to talk about those in the guidelines. That way, as new places are created, you continue to see great open spaces with a variety of types, just like you see in historic areas. Or if we talk about something like complete streets, we say that there needs to be continuous sidewalks for walking, street trees to provide shade. That's the kind of thing that came out of the study of other places outside of the region that students at CSUMB tell us about, or tourists or locals who lived here for a long time. We went out to places like San Jose and we studied places that people were going to. If we talked about legible centers and storefront windows and storefronts, and that shop front should be protected by shade, there should be a legibility and a certain functional attractiveness to these buildings. That came from one of my favorite places in this region. Go to Snooks and go to Main Street. How masterfully done that. What we're trying to get at is there could be more new places that look like that. I want to tell you that great new places, complete, compact, walkable mixed use happen all the time. And there's a really unprecedented opportunity here for the base. To get those kind of places, spaces all over the country, see have become terrific centers. And that's what these guidelines are. We want to keep it brief so that we can get into the specifics with you. Turn it back over to Josh.
Thank you, Jason.
Yeah, so here's the point where we say, any questions? No.
All right, let's start with, does any board member have any questions or comments related to the presentation of the prior workshop? Mayor.
Josh and Jason, thank you so much for working really hard with the city of Seaside. As you know, we had a lot of comments, a lot of issues, and thank you for working with us through those. I still want to bring up on what is figure 2.3 on gateways. In the verbiage up there, it said that it would be no conflict in existing specific plans or general plans that are already registered and consistent with the base use plan. You see on General Jimmore and Eucalyptus 2 secondary gateways that are identified in the map. Those aren't in our general plan, and they aren't something that we're considering at this time. And I just want to make sure that you're aware that we reserve the right to determine where those gateways are going to be. They may be there, but they may not. So I appreciate it if they're not identified as gateways on this map, because they are not in our general plan. And at this time, we haven't considered them to be in the general plan, so they really shouldn't be reflected on here as secondary gateways. And also, the only other item that really I think you've tried to address, but there's still some shalls and wills in the verbiage that really, could tend to create conflict with our zoning or density objectives in the city. That's really, for all the things that we started with, we've come down to and condensed to a couple of things left. And I really want to thank you for your work with us.
Those are good comments indeed. One of our main remaining tasks is thorough editorial that we get.
Thank you. Any other board member? Yes.
I wanted to also say, very well done. Guidelines. Looking at the description of centers, the block window issue makes sense. Test that. Already adopted those plans back in next the airport. Summers plan. Our roadways have already been put in place. So my question is, would this require have a specific plan that's coming up? Probably guidelines. My question is, would these be required? Oh. So I see a problem with it. Particular problem with
Thank you. Huddling.
Yeah. I guess it was a good question.
I guess so.
One aspect of, we're big fans of this plan. I think that when we were looking for guidance as to how to create these guidelines, we looked at historic examples, which I showed, but we were very excited about how well done your plan is. Complete, compact, walkable mixed use. Excellent. I think one important thing to note is that because these are guidelines, they're open-ended. This is a conversation that you have with plan reviewers. And none of these are set in stone, for instance. So if there's like 40 requirements, it's not important that you get 100% on each of these requirements, because the reality is when you design anything, it needs to be site specific. You have, in your area, there's topography, there are stands of trees that you're trying to protect, and there are reasons why you would want to elongate some of your blocks. Right? There's not a lot for us really to add, I think, to the planning that we've done in that site. And I hope that the guidelines would not get in the way of what you're trying to do. And it's for that reason that we have language like should, consider, and possibly. And it's for that reason that we have a lot of caveats talking about how block sizes need to change at times, or what specific densities or uses need to be market driven, for instance. So we were doing this with your project especially in mind, and I think it's a very important point about not being inflexible. Thank you.
Yeah, I would also add that specifically that has been a topic of much discussion at our task force meeting, and understanding that the temporal context of bringing these guidelines forward, we're 15 years plus in the redevelopment process, so that the intention has been to deliver a policy document that really gives confidence to the community and to developers alike, so that they can engage in this type of conversation. It has, there's a continuum of approaches that could be taken here. There's on the most kind of rigid end of things would be some of the FORA-based codes that are in vogue around the country, where it's very specific and explicit on what everything down to the sidewalk size and overhang and everything are specified to. But we kind of give that to the zoning code of the local jurisdictions, and here we were intending to provide these discrete set of guidelines that could be criteria for consistency determination, and could be a topic of discussion discussion to the level between jurisdictions, developers. Yeah. Michael had some additional comments.
Yeah, Graham, your comment directly applies to on page 2.4 where we talk about the mix of land uses. I think there are several centers on this map where residential uses are not included in the center. So it might be best for us to add a comma after housing types in number 3 in that first sentence and say where residential uses are included in the zoning or residential uses are included in the center. Another example would be in Seaside at the main gate. There's a hotel, and there are commercial, and there are other mix of office and other uses in that zoning that the city of Seaside has put together, but not residential, for example. But comparable to what we're talking about UCM does. Maybe there should be some adjacent qualification that says where residential uses are included in the center design.
And I think perhaps for just to get everyone on the same page, as I noted, there are 4 chapters, and if I can get us back to that. The chapters are, I think we're referring to the introduction page, but if you actually look at the guidelines, so there's an introduction and a policy application chapter, then there's a focus area chapter, and then there's a regional urban design guidelines chapter. So the regional urban design guidelines chapter is the one that actually contains the guidelines that would be used in the determination criteria list. And the paging, I'm sorry, looks like our paging references could be improved, but there's a map on page 2.26 that shows our trailheads, and then the next page is a table of contents for the Regional Urban Design Guidelines, Chapter 3. And you can see that that's broken out into the topics that are drawn from the last sentence on page 61, paragraph 2. So we're talking about road design, setbacks and building height, landscaping, signage, and other matters of visual importance. And then within those main topic areas, each of the guidelines is included as a separate item, so there's 10 guidelines. So our expectation is that our consistency determination checklist, which we have a consistency determination checklist for all projects that are brought from the jurisdictions. We work with the staff to go through that and say yes, no to the different criteria that we have to evaluate the projects. And then that's the basis for our staff recommendations to you all in terms of the consistency determination. So within that, we would have a mechanism for evaluating each one of these, and as we alluded to and Jason mentioned, the expectation is that we wouldn't be asking for a 100% accommodation of all each of the guidelines for a project to be recommended for approval. There would be some degree of flexibility based on site-specific constraints and local jurisdictions, priorities. So that is kind of the framework that we've been using to approach how they would be applied. And so if you're looking at the question of block lengths and all of that, I think we get into some specific language on that under our complete streets and our connectivity guidelines. So if you were going to make specific kind of policy edits on the language, that's where I would recommend focusing your attention. But I think you could also leave it up to your very able-bodied task force members who have spent hours looking over lots of this content for more detailed examination.
Thank you. Board Member Edelman?
Yes, Josh,
Jason, good work. It's this has evolved over a long period of time. You've answered a lot of our earlier questions. It works very well for medium to high density developments. It works well for mixed commercial and residential developments without any question. I do have a concern, that is we have in our midst in Monterey County the #1 residential location in the entire country, if not the entire world. Everybody flocks there. I mean, it's the cream de la cream residential area, and that's Pebble Beach. The question I've got is, or my concern is, under these guidelines, if somebody wanted to replicate Pebble Beach on Fort Ord or maybe Pebble Beach using the same design guidelines, cul-de-sacs, low density, no commercial, and so forth, meandering streets, am I wrong, or would these guidelines preclude building a development like Pebble Beach on the former Fort Ord?
Thanks for the question, Mayor. Indeed, I would say no. The guidelines, one of the areas that we have focused on, a large part is our focus areas, the maps that show where these particular set of guidelines would be most applicable. So those are on pages chapter 2, and I think page 2.3 is sort of a synopsis. It's a little, some people have difficulty interpreting this diagram, but we'll continue to refine that. But the main point is these guidelines are not applied across the board, across the entire Fort Ord area. They pertain particularly to centers, gateways, corridors, and trails. And so there's ample acreage that could be treated the way you're describing.
Thank you.
Any other board members have any questions or comments? Board Member Beach.
Yeah, is this our main discussion here?
This is the information item only, so
Okay.
it's wide open, as best we could.
So I want to thank everybody for, I mean, this has got to be the hardest working group on the peninsula, the RUD group, countless very long meetings, and the staff has been terrific, and the consultant as well. I'm board members on that committee, and I want to emphasize for everybody here that this is a draft document, it says it on the cover, and that it's a work in progress, and I think when it takes 15 or 17 years to get to something that we should have done a while ago, it does then take longer, and I think we need to be patient with ourselves that that's the situation. I think that the document is at its best when it is picking up directly from the base release plan, increasingly doing. So that's been a big push for the RUDGE, is to look at what the base release plan emphasizes, and then have this document be at least as detailed about the base release plan as the base release plan itself. There's not been the base release plan was well liked. It was award-winning. It has not been anything that we've been fighting over, and it seems that this document, the more it's based on that, the better chance it has of having a solid following and being adopted willingly. So I think there's a little more to be done with that as we draft forward. The comments already been made about removing the shalls and wills and all that sort of thing. The way, just to kind of go to Jerry's question, the way we've been dealing with that is we tried to concentrate any kind of debate about that on one page, and that's page 1.4. So 1.4 is the page where it just says applicability. How are we going to apply these things? And then it gives 3 different ways, 3 different scenarios of application. Theoretically, in my view, and I'd love to have feedback from the board on this, the document should be a neutral document for all the kind of bulk of the text. And then the debate about how to apply it should be just on that one page or in one location. So future generations for the next few years of board members or municipalities that want to discuss how the rest of it applies can concentrate their discussion on the applicability language. So I would draw your attention to that. If there's anything you would refine about that, that would be helpful. And then we will strive to make the rest of the document neutral so that, you know, again, debate is centered there. There's another document that I don't think was mentioned today, and I haven't seen it in a while, that came out of the charrette, and it was sort of studies, local studies. I don't remember what we're calling it now, Josh, but it's a supplementary, like auxiliary helping guide that is not the main design for it. So it's meant to enhance this document, but it is not subject to any of the consistency determination stuff. However, there's a standing question in the RUDGE group that I would like to also ask the board members, and they can have to weigh in right now, but for certain jurisdictions, and I'm thinking out Marina in particular, some of the stuff that's in the helping guide that's separate now may actually be preferred by Marina to be put in the main guide. So I think that is still an open question. Some, I think Seaside, for example, might say no, and would rather not have the stuff that's in the helping guide put into the consistency determining document, but some folks might want to, maybe the county, I don't know. I think that's something that we need to look at and as a board. And again, the PRAC can help do that. This document is also supposed to come back to the PRAC as a sort of final vetting or two before it's sort of stood behind as a document for the board. So that might be a way to handle that as well. The PRAC has a pretty good cross-section of board members, and the RUDGE is primarily administrative. So that was one thing. That's it for now. Sidebarring about economic.
Thank you. Board Member Beach, Board Member Morton.
Just, I was curious to see how the economic development got represented in this document. I see 1.5, and this was Dina Belzer's contribution to, and I find it incomplete. Best way of putting it. How it's written, what it's trying to guide me as a city to do or to focus on. So it's just a comment.
Thank you. Board Member Beach.
Thank you. This is another sort of bigger general comment. On the heading for Chapter 2, which is the RUDGE focus areas, it says centers, gateways, corridors, and trails. We had a very lively dialogue with the public during all these meetings, which was very helpful. It was a cross-section of different constituents. And it was pointed out to us many times that we shouldn't leave any questions hanging when we bring this document forward. So the base reuse plan requires us to have certain focus areas and to deal with certain matters of visual importance. That's the beginning of Chapter 3. So Chapter 2 says, where are you going to put it? And Chapter 3 says, what are you going to put there? And with Chapter 2, in both cases, the base reuse plan requires us to look at these particular categories that it sort of lists out as such as, and then it says, and whatever else you guys want to look at. Now that makes a lot of people nervous. We've had this conversation a lot. And so the public in our meetings often said to us, could you please look at the stuff that is the other stuff you're supposed to look at, and get to a point where you can put a period at the end of the sentence. In other words, we have looked at all the focus areas. Here's where we think we've exhausted the list. Or the 4 that they just threw out in the base reuse plan is sufficient. We don't need any more. But evaluate that question and come up with an answer so that people don't have to be nervous that we will be inventing other focus areas or other matters of visual importance as we go along. That it can close off once this document is done. So strangely, maybe a little bit, though this testifies to the fact that this is a draft document. Heading of Chapter 2 has the 4 listing focus areas, centers 2.4, gateways 2.12. But actually, if you go back in that chapter, you'll see that on 2.6, there's a new focus area called public open space. And on 2.20, there's another focus area called regional transit facilities. So there are actually 6 areas. That's meant to be, at least currently in the RUDGE discussion, an exhaustive list. We are hoping that the 6 is what we think, but again, we're open to suggestions. It's not closed. If there's 7, that's good to know. What we want to know is that it's not 6 ... more to be continued. Same thing with regional guidelines number 3, chapter 3 heading. There you can see there's a category, other matters of visual importance at the bottom, which could go on forever, but we've decided as of this draft that it's got these 2 things. So again, if you think there's anything that we need to have on the list so that we can close that category, close the focus areas, that's what we want to do. So again, sorry to go on, but this has really been a focus of major, I think, nervousness and also attention by the branch.
Thank you. Any other board members? Board member?
Thank you, Chair. Just very, very quickly, I appreciate Mayor Botem's speech's explanation. The 1.4 policy application, that's a very important page, extremely important, because that's going to be the consistency determination. I'd like to add a consideration for the regional organized task force to add a paragraph 4 and outline exactly what Mayor Botem Beach said. In other words, paragraph 4 would be the areas for application for the guidelines are the center's overview, gateways overview, the corridors, the trailheads, and the other 2 that you mentioned. That was no ambiguity whatsoever. You've got the 6 areas that this actually applies to. It's not one of these, well, it can apply to anything else. The focus area just means focus. We need to nail this down so we're not to the argument board level as the word applies and word doesn't apply. So if we put a 4th paragraph under page 1.4, outline what Mayor Botem Beach says, the ambiguity's gone, and we can all hold hands and walk under the sunset together.
Thank you. Any other board members? Board member Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the page 1.4, important page, in reading it, it looks to me as though sections 1 and 3 essentially say that where a land use plan has been approved by FORA, that's what would apply to developments. And then paragraph 2 says, but if you come forward with an amendment to your general plan or your plan that's been approved, then the guidelines would kick into play. So it looks to me as though, and I want to make sure I'm understanding this correctly, that these guidelines are being proposed as voluntary, except in cases where jurisdictions are coming forward with amendments to their general plans.
These guidelines have to be prospective. Therefore, if the Fort Worth Regions Authority Board and the local jurisdiction have concurred in a consistency determination that that legislative land use action is consistent with the base reuse plan, that stands. If a new legislative land use action were to come to FORA, or an amended legislative land use action, then the regional urban design guidelines would apply.
Right, and as a practical matter, are there any jurisdictions related to Fort Ord that haven't brought forward a general plan?
There are legislative land use actions that are still pending and need to be submitted. So that would be, there are a number. So there's some properties that only have a general plan level that don't have zoning. Zoning is a legislative land use action. A specific project would be, for example, the city of Delray Oaks would be submitting much more detailed plan for that site. That would require significant legislative land use actions by the city of Delray Oaks. So most of their property would have to come back for a concurrence. That would be subject to design guidelines. That's just one example. There are a large number.
Yeah, so just clarify that a little bit. If you have a general plan that's deemed consistent and there's a small amendment, redo the whole plan or just the amendment?
The amendment and how it applies to that particular site would have to require a new.
Any other board members? Board Member Phillips, you good to go? That's the best to do, yes. All right, let's open it to the public. Any member of the public have any desire to make any comments or ask questions? You have up to 3 minutes. Please go over to the microphone to do so. You speed up the process a little bit. If you're going to speak, try to slowly move over that way. Thank you very much.
Yvonne Stone, Executive Director of FORA Environmental Justice Network. The sign says, welcome, public meeting. Sounds like it's a board meeting of FORA, and it just doesn't, I don't see the community here. I know that there are members of some communities here, but I don't see the community as a whole here. And the urban guidelines and the many workshops that we attended and the many writings and input that we had, I was told that the contractors were going to go back to New York and work in their offices. And I said, well, I would like to see our ideas laid out as our ideas, not something that is meshed into what the jurisdictions want and the board members want. For the local community, which is never mentioned, I think it's more of a sidebar kind of thing going on and is not inclusive of our communities. The FORA plan, we don't see the FORA plan as the FORA plan that we had, which was the community plan. And I've said this over and over again. There have been changes. Those changes are not acceptable to the local people who live here, who have been living here. I worked on Fort Ord. Yeah, that many years ago. I have been a part of this process from the Restoration Advisory Board all the way down, trying to communicate with the different entities and structures that have come onto this peninsula. And it's been very hard and very challenging to come up to the people who have status, money, and resources, and a community that has been robbed of those things. And I don't see them coming back. I see a lot of things coming in, and a few people are being able to partake of the so-called commercial developments and all the things that are coming into our community. But I don't see any cooperation with the organizations and the community in a whole that has suffered as a result of this brand base closure. And I agree with one of the speakers. Things need to be laid out. I don't have the documentation for this meeting. And okay, I can go to the website and get it. Is that the communication process, the legacy we want to be
Ms. Stone, if I may,
future
your 3 minutes are up.
people here in this community?
Ms. Stone, please. 3 minutes are up. Ms. Stone? Well, thank you for wrapping up. Ms. Stone, please respect the rights and privileges and interests of other people by letting them have time as well. Thank you. Any other member of the public? Okay, now we'll close public comment. I'm sorry.
Good afternoon, board members. My name is Herbert Cortez. I'm a resident. So I have a couple comments and concerns. First of all, I just want to support board member Morton's concern with the economic impact summary that was added to the draft plan. I think one page isn't enough or does suffice such a broad guidelines to Fort Worth as far as the economic impact and the subjects in that summary as far as housing should be expanded. And I also believe that that area should have its own chapter, just because I think that the design of this crucial area, in part, is the economic impact to the area, not just the visual impact to the area. So that's the first thing. My second sort of comment is, as a public resident and also a member of a commission here in the local area, the issue with the guidelines versus mandatory standards for local jurisdiction, I think in future land development procedures are going to be an issue. And the reason why is because I keep hearing the guidelines as a sort of like a shall, and you can do it, not 100%. And I think when we go with language like that, what happens is in the local area, the commissioners are then supposed to then figure out, okay, they don't meet 100%, do they need 50%, 40%, 20%? What's the actual, I guess, tipping point that this meets any of these guidelines? And I think we should learn about that. But I think this will impact many of the local commissions. The next thing I have looking at the draft plan is the following: the selection of centers. I thought it was very, I can understand certain centers, and I couldn't understand other centers why they were selected. I thought they were inconsistent with the center definition, and I just wanted to know what the criteria were to select the specific 6 centers in this draft plan. And the final thing I wanted to say is, I forget the gentleman's name, but he asked a really good question regarding could a Pebble Beach type of development added or constructed in the Fort Worth area, and the response provided was that yes, there would be some land that could be used for that. My only concern with that is that based on what I read in the other room, that plan is the complete opposite of the Pebble Beach development. And so I think if we allow a window like that, and I'm not saying the Pebble
Excuse me, sir, I'm sorry, your time is up. Thank you very much. Anyone else in the public? Okay, let's close public comment, bring it back. I think it was named Mr. Cortez. There were some questions that he had. Senators, anyone would like to address that?
I think Josh will answer that question. I think first, I think you mentioned the economic impact summary, and I think we've already got direction from this board as part of this workshop. Certainly Councilman Morton was suggesting we should expand on that area. I think Mr. Cortez talked about making a chapter. I don't know that we'll go quite that far, but I think expanding on that impact summary we can certainly do. There was another question that he posed about guidelines and how guidelines should be more specific rather than general, that maybe flexibility is too much flexibility. That is something that both Mayor Rubio has mentioned and others, that we need to have specificity but flexibility, is what I understood. So that there isn't confusion, but at the same time the ability to manage what we have at Fort Worth. And I think the last comment about the centers, I want to repeat what was said earlier today, and that is that this does not apply to 100% of the property at Fort Worth. There's some rather specific areas, and those focus areas, the board has already directed staff to consider an additional item about where the guidelines apply, to be more clear about those focus areas in the program. Josh, do you want to add anything?
I think in regard to the question of the centers, we did our design charrette process, and there was a lot of stickering that happened during that, and we took direct input from the community. And brought all that back, and in our drafting, revisioning task force, we recognized that it would be worthwhile and important to include the broad range plan context language that set up the design principle 6 of adopting regional urban design guidelines, particularly the vision statement, which is the vision of the future form for boards that a community will grow up on the former base, having special character and identity. And this community at the same time will fit the character of the peninsula, complementary with the scale and density of the existing communities from Marina to Carmel. And there was in our three pillars of the reuse plan, education, environment, and economics, building of the community around the educational institution was a component of that, particularly design principle 6, which says create a unique identity for the community around the education. So we sort of took all this broad base of context and dove into our detailed interpretation of page 1.3, where design principle 6 in the language is included there, and there's this map. And so we spent a lot of time looking at how thick the lines were on the shaded area on the map, and through the interplay of our direct public input, our input from our task force members, and our ability to interpret this map, we came up with a proposed set of centers, which we then vetted through multiple iterations and dropped some off and included other ones. So the main point is that the centers were really intended to be these town and village centers that would be sort of the heart and soul of the new community around the education. So that is a large part of how they are derived, but kind of from an urban planning standpoint, all underpinned by transportation planning and by a sense of walkability from the center, so quarter-mile distance from the center to the perimeter of that circle. If you look on our maps, there's a circle defined each center. That represents a quarter-mile walkable distance. And so that's kind of how we ended up with those circles on the map. So if there's more to that would be helpful.
Okay. Ms. Stone had some concerns as well as questions. Josh or Jason or Michael want to address those, please?
Ms. Stone has been an active participant in a number of our design processes, present at a number of our meetings. Gone to her office, had her FORA office here, take her input, ensure that all our communications were getting to her email address, primary meeting. So we welcome and continue to welcome her input, and are always open to finding ways to address things.
Thank you. I do want to stress that if you're a member of the public and you do have questions or concerns, the best way possible is to submit those in advance so that we can make sure that we get a thorough response as possible. Josh and Jason and the board members do the best we can, but like everything else, if you have it in advance, you can get a much more thorough response that would satisfy you. But if you are a member of the public and you have questions, or you ask questions today and you feel that they were not adequately covered, please realize tonight from 4 to 6 there will be members in the room next to us who will be able to address and answer those questions, hopefully. And again, feel free to submit additional questions to the FORA board, and we will take care of them as quickly as possible. Any concluding statements from anyone on the board? Mayor Rubio?
Thank you again for all the hard work that's been done on this. I do want to reiterate my concerns over the centers, just to make sure that we cover that. And also on the regional corridors, just to point out that, we have descriptions on, like, for example, Seaside Parkway, how wide it'll be and what the features will be. And I just want to make sure that when we talk about those regional corridors, the buildings that are adjacent to that corridor will have certain features but we don't want to reach back in behind those into project areas specifically with these guidelines, because density and all those things are the city's purview. And in regards to the economic impact page, one page, that was kind of a late addition, the reason it doesn't seem to address everything is because it's kind of hard to overlay a design guideline on economics. That's a little bit difficult to do, and I know that I really haven't had a chance to really look at that language, so that may need to go back to the jurisdictions for a little bit of updating and maybe making sure that the statements that are being said there are correct and accurate.
Thank you. Seeing no other, Board Member Morton, please.
Yes, I just want to comment, as Mayor Rubio said about the economics. Dina Belzer, who was the economics component, did a report and talked about the median income and the housing. City of Marina, we have entitled 2 housing projects, large housing projects with entitlements that miss the median income in the county of Monterey completely. And I've raised this issue in PRAC is how do we address making sure that our planned areas, neighborhoods, what we do on former Fort Ord addresses the needs of the local community, the people that live and work here in Monterey County where the median income is closer to $57,000. The comments, one of them, I don't understand, they're saying something's only going to become economically viable when unit values increase, but it also talks most critically about attracting and retaining members of the millennial generation as necessary for our long-term economic revitalization. Then, in fact, when you realize, and we've all discussed these in this meeting, Ms. Belzer's report, that those coming out of college, then they're in that $57,000 to $80,000 income component. And there's no reference that cross-references this economic development to, for example, your mix of building types, which starts at 3.2 something, 3.24, 3.25, 3.27. Well, if this is the type of development I'm supposed to be implementing in the city of Marina in mixed-use areas so that there are homes that are able to be purchased, not rented. Marina has a lot of affordable rentals, but we need to have, I'm not talking about affordable in the sense of subsidized by public taxpayer, but affordable because I make enough money to qualify for a loan to purchase a unit. That is still missing, and such a vital component to making this regional urban design guidelines meet the needs of who lives here, and that's what I'm looking for in the economic input. So thank you for allowing me to address that.
Jason, Josh, you got that? Okay, good. Anyone else? Board Member?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to thank the Regional Urban Design Group that developed these guidelines. They're really terrific, even for one of the non-FORA land use jurisdictions. I'm seeing a lot of things in here that will be very helpful as thought pieces in our city for projects that are coming up. And I want to say I appreciate the wonderful effort that has produced this document on that basis. Thank you.
Thank you. Board Member B.
I just wanted to put a plug in for this table arrangement going forward, because I'm getting older and now I can actually see who I'm talking to across, so it's very helpful, and I just think that discussion is actually much more facilitated by that. So.
Good.
If we're all here, we're all bidding, I think it's good.
Raise your hands, how many people like this setup? And I had nothing to do with this, so don't. Okay, people wait on me. My eyesight is poor. I cannot see you.
They're not.
Let's have a closing comment from the Executive Officer.
Well, just I wanted to comment quickly about the table. Because we have 25 members that sit on the board, it's often difficult to be a little more intimate in terms of the debate, discussion that goes back and forth. But several of the board members asked, and because this was a workshop format, the staff, and you can blame Jen Simon for this. Jen Simon put it all together and made it work so that we could be in an area where much more like what it was when we were at the museum. Remember Mayor Pendergrass, when we were at the museum, and how that was? It was much more where the board members could see each other and interact rather than quite a distance apart. When we have the larger meetings, we will still have to have the larger setup, but we can keep trying to do this. It's a little, we recognize it's a little different for members of the public because they don't get to see everyone's face all the time, so it's a little difficult for the public, but this allows the board to deliberate in a much more intimate way. So that's where we did.
The staff is getting older too, though, so it's a slightly longer walk.
And all the board members feel comfortable with people sitting behind them. So. Just before closing this meeting, adjourning this meeting, the executive committee tomorrow meets at 3:30, followed immediately thereafter by the legislative committee. So if you have a schedule that conflicts with that, change the conflict and do that, please. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you all very, very much.